our third speaker of the evening, which is Dr. Eva-Marie Muller-Stuler, Chief Data Scientist and leader of the Center of Excellence for IBM Middle East and Africa. She's led groundbreaking data science teams and implementations of fully deployed large-scale AI projects for over 15 years globally. She's passionate about advising IBM's top-tier clients and governments in their data strategies that show value and transform to lead in the field. Eva-Marie, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Let me quickly share my screen. Can you see it? Look good?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm talking similar as others today about how to build trust AI and how to fight the bias. What can we actually do from a more practical point of view? Perfect. I don't really need to introduce myself. I think Richard has already done that. I have over 15 years, nearly 20 years of experience in that field. I'm the chief data scientist. I've did my PhD in that topic as well, so in mathematics/medical physics. And the question is, what is the lessons learned actually? Because AI ethics has been on the agenda for 8 years, 9 years. Actually, it started even earlier. In the 50s, it was already discussed. It was actually technology ethics was discussed for over 100 years. But it's in the last 2 years, actually, we see it actually ramping up as a topic and becoming more and more important. Let me dive in and say, what is actually the problem and why should we care? Why is it important? And I was smiling earlier when John showed his Skynet. I also have the Skynet, and people think that is a risk of AI, and it is not. It might be one of the risks in the very far future. At the moment, we are miles away from AI that can take over the world. I'm still begging for the morning where the AI in my mobile phone gets up and makes me coffee. It hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it will happen anytime soon. It doesn't even control my pocket. So, but if that is not the risk, what is the risk? And the problem that we have is that the risk is all around us already, and it's far more subtle. If you go on Google and you type in nurse, what you see is only women. If you type in car mechanic, software engineer, software programmer, and so on, what you see is mainly men. And that is a risk that we didn't have in the past. When we were younger, and we would say, oh, Dad, I want to be a car mechanic, but the boys in school are saying that's a boy's job, your parents could immediately interact. But AI is an accelerator of the inequality we have in society. Let me show you another example. It's an empty office space. And clearly there's nothing wrong because there's no human being. So what is biased about that? But actually, when you look at it in detail, is the keyboard was optimized and measured on male hands, white male hands to be precise. The mouse was measured and optimized on white male hands. The height of the screen, the iPhone design is too large for women. The office chairs and their adjustability, the table height, and actually data shows that even the room temperature in the office is 5 degrees too cold for women because it was measured in the 70s and 80s on people in the office, and they were mainly men in suits. So just think about it for one moment, how that is 50% of the society. That is not a minority. So if that is what it looks like for the women, what does it look like for other minorities? The problem is not that the solutions we develop are biased or they're putting in a bias, but actually our world is biased. And therefore the data we're using as inputs is biased. And that will lead to our AI being biased. And the problem with that is AI and machine learning are used to do more and more high-stake decisions. For example, college admission, employment, who's getting what job, can we use AI to look through CVs, credit applications, what data do we have, and many more. I remember in the past, we were always saying, oh, for credit models, we said, oh, we don't use gender, race, and religion. That's why we don't have a bias. But actually, the bias is not just in these three variables. It is, you have lots and lots of proxies that you might be using. And in the data engineering that you're using, you might even forget that you used these proxies. Coming back to the question about what is equality, and do we need equality or actually do we need equity? We have more than 180 biases that are defined and classified. There's a whole list of it. You can go through them. And we are blind to our own biases. We only see other biases, or we see when we are not fairly treated. And we often don't see the risk in bias. When we build AI solutions, we like to trust them, and we don't really understand the complexity that goes in. I think the difference, and we talked about it earlier about the question of law, what is the difference between equality and equity? And there is a saying that every law that comes with a financial fine is only for poor people. If you're rich enough, it doesn't matter if your speeding ticket is $100. It doesn't hurt you. If you can't afford your next lunch, you can't afford to speed because $100 will hurt you. And that's why we see the difference between equality and equity being so important. And it's also important in our AI solutions. So when you apply for a loan and it gets rejected, won't you like to know why? Don't you have a right to know why? If a doctor recommends a certain procedure, don't you want to know how he was trained, that he's actually able to make this decision? And shouldn't that be the same with your AI solutions? Or should it be just, oh, the robot said so? The problem that we're facing, which makes it actually a lot worse, is the pacing problem. So the way our technology develops is exponentially. But actually our social, economic, and legal systems are only, and especially our society, is only changing incrementally. So the gap between what we can do and what we understand to our technology is getting bigger all the time. That combines it with what we call the Colin-Rich dilemma. And the Colin-Rich dilemma is basically when we develop something, we can still change it, we don't really see the impact it will have. But once it's in the society and it's being consumed and so on, we can't really change it anymore. We see what is wrong with it, but it's too expensive, it's too difficult, it's too time consuming to actually turn back the time and change it. We've seen that, I think most of you have watched The Social Dilemma, when the guy said, oh, I developed the like button. I had no idea, I had an idea what it means. When people developed Tinder, they had no idea how it will change how we go on dates and meet our lifetime partners. Facebook, Twitter, the internet, nobody had an idea what it would lead to. I remember when mobile phones came onto the market, and I was like, everyone was, why do we need that? Who wants to be reached all the time? If you're at home and somebody calls, if you want to speak somebody, call them back. So at that time, it would have been easy to change the technology. Now, everyone has a mobile phone. Now you can't get it out of the people anymore. So these are all the different problems we see with data and AI. And the problem is with bias, it actually gets worse. There is a saying, machine learning algorithm goes to a bar, and the barkeeper comes up and says, hey, what would you like to drink? The machine learning algorithm pauses a second, looks around and says, the same as everyone else. And this thing is, with that in mind, the machine learning algorithm is backwards looking on the input data. So if that bar is only frequented by white men, it will always recommend beer, no matter what's happening. And women will never enter that bar, or other people who would not like to have beer. It would always stick to the same kind of people. Similar to looking at CVs and recommending jobs. If in the past, people in for these jobs came from Oxford or Cambridge, they will never let other people in because that was what worked in the past, no matter how much things change. So what is the solution and what can we do? First of all, we need a global AI governance framework. AI has no boundaries. It travels around. We use Google algorithms that sit in the US, and we send technology around. We have no idea where the AI is developed, on which and where it's deployed and where it's actually being used. That is easy said, but not easy done, because for a global AI governance framework that also has to consider our ethics, ethics is different in every single culture. So when we look at a lot of these ethic boards and a lot of these prizes for diversity and ethics, they all go to Silicon Valley and to New York, and we see maybe a little bit in London, but hardly anything in the ethics discussion comes from the Southern Hemisphere, and any of the key player on the table are often going to the people who can be there and travel and afford the trip. So certain demographics are already not at these tables. Second solution, when we build something, AI, and in every single AI project, ethics, fairness, bias cannot be in the afterthought. It cannot be that I build something, a recommendation engine or something, and then I try to tweak it and put it in there. But we have to ask ourselves, can we actually build that in an ethical way? Is there a way that I can actually do recommendations for candidates at universities that still allows minorities in? And only if we start with that at the beginning, we have a chance to actually build a fair solution, or we just don't do it. The third one is actually an interesting one, clear responsibilities. And if you ask companies who's responsible, you actually see a very different view of who you're actually talking to. The CEO or COE and COE and sorry, CEO, it's a spelling mistake. CEO and board have different views on it. So if you ask, 4 out of 5 directors will say that AI issues should be a board level responsibility, at least to a moderate extent. But only half of the CEOs view them actually as their CEO level responsibilities. When you ask, is tech accountable or not? Then over half of all executives point to the CTO or CIO and say it's their job to be accountable for AI ethics. But if you ask to point a single one, 15% of them point to a non-technical role. If you ask the CTOs and CIOs who've been trained in AI ethics, the number is nearly not existent. Solution number 4 is actually an easy one. It's in diverse teams, and you can't listen to a talk from a mathematician without a mathematical formula. So I love that slide. But we know that the diversity, the larger the diversity in a crowd, the smaller is their error. So when we build AI solutions, for example, Siri, for example, Alexa, and so on, they facial recognition. They didn't work on women. They didn't work on certain demographics because they were built by a very homogenic 20 to 30-year-old boys coding the in Silicon Valley. If the diversity in that team would have been larger, if they would have been different people from different backgrounds and so on, these errors are getting picked up at the beginning. Somebody would have said, hold on, we're building the solution, but it doesn't work for me. With having a very homogeneous team, you will run into diversity issues. Then another solution is, and it's actually a problem that is getting bigger, the number of women in STEM is dropping. It's dropping to a scary degree. Why is that? In my opinion, one of the big drivers is social media. We see far and far more women on social media who are about looking good, posing, makeup, and so on, and the divide is getting bigger. We have to start with the little ones. And I remember when I was a child and you went to a toy shop, it was toys. When you nowadays go to a toy shop, you have pink on one side for the girls and blue for the boys. There is no rule that says that girls can't play with electronics. There is no rule that girls don't like blue. So we have to really think about how we train and teach our kids. Do we teach them physics? Do we teach them chemistry? Do they teach them mathematics? What are the books? What are the role models? What are the toys and colors? We have to talk about AI ethics in schools and bias, and especially in universities and in STEM subjects, to make them aware of it. And then even when they start working, talk to them, make it clear, work with the different industries and say there is a problem with ethics. Then when it comes to details, when we talk about data science and AI, we have a clear ideal on what it should look like. We say data needs to be organized, it needs to be trustworthy. It's a bit like going to the library. Every single book is labeled, it has a number, you can get it, it's been reviewed, you have access rights, you check it in, you check it out. That's how it should be like. Same with the models. You have a clear ML ops framework. You do this, this is where your data lies, this is where your model is. In reality, data is all over the place. It's of crazy bad quality, it's missing, it's different understanding, it's a different dictionary. Every time you go to a bank, ask them what is an active customer, and I promise you, every single department you talk to will give you a different answer. And the coding and the models and the structure of it is all over the place as well. If you build models like that, of course, you don't know what risk you're running. The last one, and then otherwise it gets too technical, is don't forget to monitor and train the models. A lot of clients that we talk to, they build POC after POC. They build a proof of concept. They have some models here and they build a dashboard and say, this is the outcome. And that's how we do our decisions. But that they actually need people to deploy the model, to monitor it, to retrain the model, and that it's an ongoing process to make sure that it still stays fair, that it's still robust, that nobody changed something, that it's still explainable over the time. And that is something that is really important and is forgotten in most of the companies and most of the AI solutions that we see on the market today as well. So, wrapping it up, guiding principle for all AI is every decision made by AI needs to be explainable, transparent, and fair. And I'm not just saying that from being a good person. There is a business case to that. If you as a business deploy an AI solution that you can't explain, when you just say the model that's made it and it's wrong, it will cost, and it should cost your head as a decision maker in that company. If you're being in the news for being unfair, to being against certain demographics or targeting the wrong groups for the wrong reasons, it will directly impact your business value and it will hurt. Google it, there are lots of cases out there. And most important, AI should always be human-centric. I will finish with a quote from Ruth Ginsburg that you probably heard before. And she said, when I'm sometimes asked, where will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And my answer is, when there are 9. People are shocked. But there's been 9 men, and nobody ever raised a question about that. If you build a machine learning algorithm based on who should be in the Supreme Court and who would be successful, it will always come up with 9 men. It will never become 9 women. But there isn't a reason for that. And so you really have to ask yourself before you build something, will that actually contribute to building a better world? Or will it just be another machine learning algorithm going to a bar? Thank you.
Thanks, Eva-Marie. Thanks so much. I think it is so important and fascinating to know that it is not the AI systems that are biased right away. It is also that biasness has always been there in the society, how we need to understand and make the AI systems more human-centric, I think. And there are so many invisible biases already into our systems, and we do not know the complexities and the risks of it. And definitely ethics cannot be an afterthought. And we could sometimes have our biases and build the systems without knowing it. This is so important to know. And the solutions that you have provided of having diversity, training our kids, is something that we should be looking for. And human centricity and the social perspective and ethics cannot go out of our systems anywhere that we build. We need to be conscious of what we are building so far. Definitely. And we should recognize and retrain our models as and when we realize how our data and models can actually create biases.